Call a September 22nd Danville Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. And I'm asked that Sally Davenport lead us in a prayer to begin our meeting.
Thank you. Let's pray. Dear Lord, please bless us and watch over our work that we do today for the betterment of our community. And please, Lord, also help us to get through this difficult time and do the best that we can for each other. In your name, amen.
Thank you. Have a motion for approval of the August 25th minutes. Okay, do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Okay, Sam, thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you, motion carries. Have a financial report.
Yeah, the finance report is in your packets for August. Nothing too particular I need to point out. Glad to answer any questions the commission might have.
Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Have a motion for approval. Okay, second by Ms. Davenport. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Motion carries. Steve, you want to go over the construction security sureties?
Turn my page here. Okay, so the construction surety is a little complicated again for month 2 in a row. As you remember, last month, Jody Sharp Construction presented a cash surety in the amount of $243,410 to us. And in that same month, we did a release last month of $138,323 for items related to the street project on Candlewood Section 8. We also did a release of $2,410, which were our admin fees. And then since that time, everything's been completed with the project, with the exception of a portion of the sidewalks. So we're coming back here this month, and we've gone out and looked at the project, and we're asking for what we'll call release number 2 of $81,870.14. That's the street, curb, gutter, and even a portion of the sidewalks are done. We're keeping $20,806.50, which is, there's still 1,261 feet of sidewalks to be completed. Typically, those get built as the homes are built. The sidewalk sections are done, or the aprons that come in off the other road where there's 2 existing houses that front the next street. So these sidewalks will be built incrementally over the life of however long it takes to build the 23 homes. So we'll hold that bond until those sidewalk sections are done, or he can come in and ask for release in proportion. That includes a 10% contingency. So what we're asking for then again is to release $81,870.14, and with this release back to Mr. Sharp, and we'll hold the sidewalk bonds. I will add, there's a good chance he may substitute that cash bond with a letter of credit, because the sidewalks can be bonded separately. That way, that would give him the ability to request the city to accept the street portions and keep the sidewalk as a separate project. But it was all initially bonded together, so he'll have to separate that with a new bond. And I think that's what he plans to do, is bring a letter of credit to us at some point in the future and then get that other cash portion released back. His report, I think I gave you the punch list items of the road, of all the issues that relate to the road: water, sewer, drainage, curb, gutter, etc. Glad to answer any questions about that.
Anybody have any questions? We have a motion to approve the release then.
I'll move to release the funding, the $81,870.14.
Okay, thank you. We have a second? Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. All in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries. Steve, would you like to present the subdivision approvals?
I will. You guys got these in the packets, but they're up on the slide just for the video, but I'll walk you through. We did not have tech review this month. We initially just had one plat filed, and I reached out to the committee members and said we just had one plat, and we all agreed let's just do preliminary and final here at P and Z. And then when Kendall brought in the corrected plat, he had a couple others that were kind of emergency plats that needed to get through the process, and reached out to, I'm not sure who I called initially on that, probably the chairman, and just said, hey, there's 3 as opposed to 1. Can we do all 3 here as preliminary? They're all minor in nature, so there's 3 plats, but they both need preliminary and final approval. So I'll walk you through all 3 of them here in a little more detail than normal. The first one that you have is Jason and Melissa Say. They've applied for approval of subdivision on tracts of land containing 6.206 acres located 860 Wells Landing Road in Danville. Property is zoned agriculture, and the plat is titled Plat Amendment 1 for the Ernest Finley property. The staff suggested eliminating the second P and Z signature block that was on by mistake and adding a non-conforming notation regarding a garage structure on Lot 2 that lies in the side setback. And is ready for it, and then we needed a utility signature box because Lot 1 is a new building lot of record. The plat is ready for preliminary and final approval contingent on those corrections. And I don't know if we want to do all 3 or.
Let's do all 3
Okay,
at once.
all right.
3 simple ones.
Second plat. And these next 2 are interesting because they had cemeteries on them, and we asked for some special notations due to family cemeteries being on these 2 tracts, or these 2 plats. Number 2 is Richard and Margaret Burke and the Bull Land Trust have applied for approval of a subdivision on tracts of land containing 3.303 acres located at 3420 Chrisman Lane. Property is zoned agriculture. The title of the plat is Amendment 1 of the Jackson property. The staff suggested a note related to a perpetual cemetery access and the removal again of an extra P and Z signature box. The corrections have been made, so that plat was actually corrected and brought back since we marked it up, and the plat is ready for preliminary and final approval. And you can see the cemeteries up there on the north part of the property, just a family cemetery, and typically when we see those and they're noted on the plat, we just want to make sure that there's an access note that runs into the future for all future family members or heirs of the property. They can get to that cemetery if it sells to another family member or an outside party. Again, all the corrections were made on this Jackson plat.
Is that access along that front area there? Is that where it's at? Or is
The access is noted that it's through that property.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it goes through the property. It gives access. It's not dashed on there like a driveway.
Right.
But the note that's on it says it has access through that property for the future.
Okay.
And actually, there's a driveway that goes back there through the farm. Third plat. Again, the cemetery down on the south side of the property, you can see there. A little bigger cemetery. Connie Ball has applied for approval of subdivision on tracts of land containing 2.167 acres located at 13646 Lebanon Road, Perryville, Kentucky. Property is zoned agriculture. Tract 1B contains the Ball Family Cemetery tract. The staff suggested, again, a note for the cemetery, its access, and an encroachment into the building setback line and a non-conforming note. Really, the cemetery doesn't need a non-conforming note, but there's a rock wall, so we just said, it doesn't meet the setback. It's not a building, but it does encroach into the setback line for the wall of the cemetery. So a note about that just in case. We also suggested it needs a utility box because these are going to be building lots. And again, elimination of an extra P and Z signature block. The plat is ready for preliminary and final approval, contingent on those corrections coming back to us.
Did this one need the dimensions on the cemetery? Does it need it on there for some reason? 99 feet and 76?
I was thinking they might be, and it might be hard. Let me double check that real quick here.
I guess I didn't think I saw
They're on there.
Historically.
They're really hard to see.
yeah.
It doesn't show an area, like a,
Doesn't give you a perspective on where it's at, is what I'm saying. It's just a rectangle or trapezoid.
right. It's showing the 99 by 76.
Because I guess I've seen in other flats where it's just not really clearly specified. But if this one has stone fencing around it, it's
Yeah, and it's located, I would say, that the way the cemetery is located on the outer edge would be similar if you look at the prior plat, the way the surveyors locate structures.
Right,
I mean, there's not exact.
there's not an exact on
There's
there.
not calls that show us exactly how many feet back, but that's a survey grade.
I just
location.
didn't know whether there was a specific reason the numbers were there. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, I think he just gave the dimensions on,
So I assume, it's got the road frontage, but the current access is through the egress easement because of the railroad?
yeah,
Abandoned railroad?
so the abandoned railroad, it's shown on that deed. It actually has been, Kendall would need to be here to help me with this, but that abandoned railroad has already kind of been conveyed back into the property. It still shows up on the deed, but the abandoned railroad, there was a conveyance back to all the property owners when it was abandoned. So it's part of this property, but it still shows almost like an easement. Pretty
Any
busy.
more questions or discussion? Henry, can we have a joint motion for, one motion for preliminary and final approval?
Mr. Chair, since they're not criteria or conditions that separate them, I think you can have a joint motion for all three. Yes, sir.
Okay, do we have such a motion?
I'll make a motion that we both give preliminary and final approval to all three of the subdivision plots.
Okay, we have a second for the motion. Steve, second. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. Thank you. Motion carries. Guess now we need to enter the public hearing portion of our meeting. And ask that people that speak for or opposed to the public hearing come to the microphone and give your name and address. So, Steve, you want to explain the
Yep.
public hearing first?
All right, this is a public hearing. It's going to look and feel like a zone change, but it's a future land use map amendment hearing. And as you know, when a zone change is being proposed, one of the things that's looked at is the future land use map and its compliance. And if the map doesn't fit well with the zoning request, the applicant has two choices. They can not zone the property, I guess, or they can attempt to amend the future land use map. They can do that separately, or they can have a concurrent hearing with their zone change request. The applicant's here in the room. He owns a property at the corner of Jean Drive and Houstonville Road. Shown on the exhibit up there. Guys got out there, it's the corner house right here in this location. His desire is to zone it to commercial and possibly lease to an office like some other transitional structures have done on Houstonville Road, real estate office or something of that nature. And as we talked, his option again was to, we looked at the flume and the future land use map still shows as low density. However, a lot of the properties in that area are commercial. Future land use map is commercial. This kind of block between Perkins and Jean, those three homes, still are shown as low density. So his option was to file the zone change and the flume amendment together. There's costs with that for the applicant. We also talked about that he could break them into two, do the future land use map separate, see if that's successful, then if so, bring the zone change back the following month or at a later date. That way, if it doesn't work out, he's not out the same kind of money for two applications. If you file them together and the flume is not successful, and we've had cases like that, the other case is just withdrawn and all the fees are forfeited at that point. So the real cost, as you know, on any zone change request or flume amendment is survey cost, and the survey had to be turned in as part of this, and that was done. And so we'll walk you through what the request is, what the future land use map is, and how he's verifying to this board that he complies with the future land use map amendment process. With that, I'll shut that door real quick. So we'll start with page 1 in the staff report, and you can see an application was filed on August 11th. The applicant's here in the room, and again, the property is 1103 Houstonville Road. The current flume is low density. The proposed flume request is commercial. The property size is 0.246 acres. Single family or R1A is the original zoning for the property. And we'll show you some maps here in a second, but the surrounding areas comprise mainly of residential, commercial uses in close proximity. But I want to point out what commercial land use is. It's defined right there on page 1. Commercial land use, the flume designation, it says this land use designation consists of a broad array of commercial development, including individual commercial, retail, service, hotel, office, in parentheses, businesses that may exist along a highway corridor or business district, as well as in larger planned shopping centers and office parks. Typically what we do then, we look at the future land use map, but we always look at the goals and objectives. They're outlined on pages 2 and 3 of your staff report. Comprehensive Plan Chapter 1 has goals and objectives, and the ones that seemed relevant for this type of application were the general land development, economic development, community facilities, transportation, and land use. Won't go through all those details, but those goals and objectives are outlined on page 2 and 3 of the staff report. With that, I'll turn to there's an aerial or a shot here that you can see a little better shot of the house. This is the property right at the corner of Jean. See the Marathon stations right here. I think you guys are familiar. There's commercial in this location, and you can see looking down Houstonville Road. This is the survey that came in. One interesting thing, a flume amendment is we process it just like a zone change. So there was a sign on the property. All the adjacent property owners received letters, and we put ad in the newspaper, just like a zone change request. We did get a couple calls. Calvary Baptist Church owns a couple structures there across the road. We talked to the neighbor on the south side. That's a rental property, and a couple other neighbors. Most of them were just inquiring what the sign was and why it was there and what's a flume amendment. And none seemed to have any particular issues with the request. Just inquiring what was going on, because we put that big, ugly yellow sign out on the property. And but that's the survey that came in with the exhibit. There's the future land use map. And this, we'll zoom in, but it's a little hard to see, but the property's right here. No, right? No, it's right here. It's right there. Yeah, that's Jean. It's interesting to note, this property is shown as low density, and this property is shown as low density. On the future land use map, they're actually zoned commercial. So again, there's a lot of inconsistency here. When you kind of look at the future land use map, you've got the pink is commercial, and you can see a lot of that's on this side. There's commercial on this side, but some of it's not correctly shown on the future land use map. And then there's most of that's shown as low density, and then that's multifamily, then that's commercial, and then it's transitions back to commercial in this area. When you look at from a further out shot of Houstonville Road, you kind of see what we've got going on here from the split. Kind of pretty good pattern of commercial, but it seems to stay on one side of the road. Then it gets on both sides as we get closer to the bypass. And then this last section is still low density. You know, if there was a staff exercise to fix the future land use map, this is a perfect example where there would probably be an exercise to make most of that Houstonville Road commercial or mixed use, but we would not want the depth to go back into the neighborhoods to some degree, so there'd be a real kind of precise type of pattern we'd try to develop if we were amending the map to probably deal with that last section of that low density that really doesn't function in that way. This is the zoning map, which kind of tells a different picture. Again, this is the property right to the north of the property owners, and it's commercial. Everything across the street is commercial, and then the commercial's here. So this is really the last kind of leg of the low density or single family that's being used. And the reality is the properties are still single family, and there are families living in them functionally as viable single family. I mean, this gentleman lives there with his family, and he's indicated it's not a great place to raise his family. He'd like to put some kind of commercial endeavor into the building and relocate somewhere else. He has another business on 2nd Street, and the goal here is to zone this property commercial and transition into some kind of office use or specialty retail or something of that nature into the future.
Okay.
So,
while you're on this particular
Sure.
point, the stop sign there is located just behind the black car. It's on that side of the street. And then
Stop
the
sign.
property, the property we're talking about, the parking is behind the building.
It's behind the building, that's
Okay,
correct.
so you've got clearance enough to stop at the stop sign.
Yeah.
And get access on the street, which is always a concern.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So this is the survey, and the driveways comes in here off Jean Drive. And yeah, it's actually a really good point. For these smaller lots, you know, a concern would be if they were developed commercial and all of a sudden there were cuts into Houstonville Road,
Yes,
a whole bunch of them kind of staged. The access would be off the side street and would function to the rear of the business lot if it's developed that way. Now, over time, you could imagine that some of these lots could be consolidated, and maybe there's one bigger business, but in the short term, the property owner's desire is to keep the house as it is, just transition into some kind of retail endeavor. In fact, with a flume amendment, the applicant we'll get to that, has to show a compatibility assessment or standard, and what he's done is put together draft conditions that would come in with his zone change to show this body that this is kind of the scale of what he's hoping to do on the property. And what he's done is to show that the commercial footprint's fairly small, the parking stays kind of where it is, the signage is fairly minimal. Again, the goal is to transition this into some kind of retail or office, not tear down the house and build back up AutoZone or something of that nature. So
The
that.
residential properties that are around, I believe you said, are they all occupied by residents?
They are occupied, and the one to the south, the property owner called, it's a rental property currently. He rents it to, I don't know if it's a family or individual, but it's being used as single family. He indicated that he was curious about this application because he said, I've been thinking the same thing, and at the termination of this lease, I may consider something similar. He says it's just getting harder to rent because of the proximity to the road and the traffic and the retail that's across the street. It's just not as viable as as a single family unit, but it's in rental. Now, some of the homes in that stretch that you see that's still low density, those are owner occupied, some of them, and some of them are rental. We don't have the exact splits on that. But those homes that still face Houstonville Road, I think, are obviously in transition, as you can see, as you see on the other side of the road, you move back in towards town, a lot of small offices and shops have occupied several that used to be single-family homes. Yeah. So with that, we'll turn back to the staff report on page 4. I don't think there's any other exhibits we need to jump on to. That's a close-up of the property in the zoning map. Again, it shows there's commercial on, two sides of the property, and two sides are single-family, being a corner property there on Houstonville Road. I also think it is important that the property does front Houstonville Road. Again, I think what we would always want to protect is that transition back to the neighborhood. There needs to be a stopping point. I've seen a lot of streets transition like this. They were smaller streets, single-family, then they get wider and busier, and they turn into commercial, but at some point, those are still residential properties, especially to the west. And at what point does commercial need to stop and not move into the neighborhood? If this house faced the other direction and felt more like it was an internal residence to Jean, you could see that might be a different situation than the fact that it faces the road. But then the access does come off Jean, so that may be a factor. Again, a lot of those things are really zone change type things, but this is the future land use map request at this point. So with that, I'll jump to page 4. Chapter 9, we do talk about future land use map in our comprehensive plan, and specifically in Danville. And the last paragraph under where it says commercial use, it says additional land will also be required for development of commercial uses. And the last sentence that's underlined, it says recommended that land for expansion of commercial uses be available in all sections of the Danville urban area. We've looked at this Danville future land use map paragraph before in prior cases, but that is in chapter 9 of the comp plan. And with that, we'll turn to page 6 of the staff report. We talk about our future land use map compliance and how we amend the future land use map. And the protocols are listed kind of at the top of the page, but at the bottom of the page, we talk about the procedures for amending the future land use map. And the last sentence says the Planning Commission's decision on a flume amendment request shall be considered final action. So that's different than the zone change. When you all vote on a flume amendment, it's final action. The zone change is a recommendation. The rezoning application that necessitates the flume amendment can be submitted concurrently again. So we are one of the few communities in the state, there's just a handful that allow flume amendments incrementally by applicants, not just the staff, or in a 5 or 10-year process with a comp plan rewrite. We allow the flume to be amended when an applicant can justify what's on page 7 of the comp plan. And what we have in there is that the approval of flume amendments should be based on at least one of the following criteria. And we have 3 kinds of criteria. The third one is basically, that's bolded, makes the applicant prove that what he's proposing will be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And the way that's done is obviously conditions. So that's where the two come together with the zone change and the flume amendment. Are the conditions assure the community and us, because they're recorded if they're approved, what's going to happen on the property? When we break these two processes apart, you're looking at the conditions in a draft form, and when the zone changes come back, that's when they would actually be, if approved, are recorded and binding on the property. At this point, they're more for you to understand the scale of what's being proposed in the property. Bottom of page 7, we also have development review provisions, and on page 8, they relate to commercial development. Those are more policy directives. So when a zone change comes in, we look at the future land use map, we look at the goals and objectives, and we look at the policy directives, and all those things flow towards what you see on the top of page 9, which are the applicant's development conditions. So with that, I'll read those. These are the draft zone change conditions that the property owner has put together. I gave him lots of models, and we sat down and worked through them, and these are the things he felt comfortable with at this point in time, and thought these would be appropriate, that he was willing to commit to, and he thought showed the scale of what he wants to do on the property, and I'll read those. Number 1 says applicant agrees no more than 75% total lot coverage throughout the property. Not sure what zoning district would come behind this. We've talked a little bit about that when he was considering filing these concurrently. Highway business is clearly across the street, and highway business feels like a natural fit, but highway business limits any residential use. So if down the road someone wanted to have, for example, a CPA wanted to locate his office and live there, the highway business would not allow that. General business would allow that. Neighborhood business would allow that. Those zoning districts all allow you to cover more lot coverage than what he's committing to here. So 75% means it's going to stay somewhat a yard, a house, green in some nature. If you zone highway business, you can actually cover 75% of the lot in blacktop buildings and signage, whatever. So this commitment is saying it's going to stay somewhat less intense than the highway business. But I don't think we've finalized the zone change request because, again, it was still up in the air what happens with the flume amendment. And if it's not successful, well, then it's not successful. If it is, the next month or the next month, the request could be highway business, could be general business, or could be neighborhood business, or it could be office professional. There's several options there. And so these might change slightly more specific on that. But the 75% is basic commitment to say it won't be completely covered in blacktop in buildings. Number 2 is on building square footage. You've seen commitments like this on other commercial cases. This says 4,000 square foot. The house is, you can see, it's probably a fairly ambitious number, 4,000. But if thinking down the road, if it ever became a 2-story or there was an addition, there's a little bit of footprint for that. But with the 75% lot coverage and parking, it's pretty unlikely going to get the 4,000. And I forget how big the house was. About 12. It's about 1,200 square foot. So there's going to be a parking need. You can see it would be a pretty big push to get to the 4,000, almost have to go to 2-story or something of that nature. But this is footprint, and just put it in as a cap, as a, down the road. If he goes highway business, I guess there might be some potential. But when you look at parking, building, and that lot coverage now, it's probably unlikely to get to that number. Signage, number 3, says it would be 1 monument sign, 10 foot, not 64 square feet. Commercial zones let you go up to 26 feet in signs and 128 square feet in sign face. So this is smaller, just a monument sign, not a tall pole sign. It would be just a monument sign, no more than 10 foot with the frame and 64 square feet max in sign face. That's probably less than a lot of, there's one house, I believe, that's converted to a State Farm office somewhere in there that you've seen. It actually has a pole sign and a fairly big sign. That would not be the style of sign that would be allowed on this property. It'd be more of a,
Some restrictions on size.
excuse me?
I thought we had some restrictions.
We do, and 26 feet in height and 128 is what's allowed in highway business. 128 square feet, yeah, max.
16 in height,
It's 26.
26
Mhm. The old sign standards, we have some 40-footers. The tire center that's down there by Sonic, that's a 40-footer. So they were 40, then they went to 30, and we've lowered them. Face has kind of stayed consistent in size. It was 100, we bumped it up to 128. That's a highway business standard, and again, this property being 2/10 of an acre, this size, the applicant worked on restricting the signage down that would just function, even wall signage may be whoever the next client. Again, you gotta understand that his desire is to lease this to somebody else to put in a business, so not exactly sure what type of signage they would need, or if any. But that's the commitment there. And then 4 tries to deal with uses. So the zoning ordinance has a lot of charts and uses, and the applicant's committing to limit the commercial uses to office, professional, and specialty retail under 4,000. That's where the 4,000 came in. We have a category in the zoning ordinance that's called specialty retail under 4,000. It's little things, bike shops, offices, small retail. It's not fast food. It's not car-related. It's specialty retail is kind of lots of different retail that you can think of, a coffee shop. You can think of all kinds of things down Houstonville Road. A salon could work in there, but it's not going to be anything with drive-throughs or fast food or anything of that nature. And so the commitment at this point is commercials limited to office, professional, and specialty retail under 4,000. Because that's the way the category reads, that's where the 4,000 cap came in on the other. The last condition is that all parking and areas will be paved. When it becomes a commercial project and if the parking's expanded and built, it all has to be paved and landscaped, and that any future utilities will be underground. So at this point in time, for a flume amendment, that's kind of the first shot at conditions. They could change slightly, I guess, if the zone change comes back, but these are kind of the scale and style that the applicant wanted to put forward for this meeting. There were really no staff items of concern. I really have nothing else to add. The applicant's here. He's nervous about being here. He's not been before the planning commission before. He's never done anything like this with his property. He does have a business on 2nd Street, and he'd like to turn us into a leasable commercial property for the future. And the first step is the flume amendment. So I'd be glad to answer any questions you all may have, and he's here if you have any questions of him.
Just as a comment, a question, the signage itself and whether it interrupts visibility if the stop sign's addressed otherwise. It'll be part of the zoning and
Yeah,
placement.
it'd be part of 2-step.
Yes.
It would be, the sign permit comes through us.
Right,
And we would make sure it's not in the site triangle. It would have to be located where it's so many feet off. We have a standard, it has to be so many feet off the pavement. Can't be in the site triangle. So more than likely, it'd be shifted to the southern portion of that property. Or, it's not going to be in the very corner right there because of the intersection.
right, I realized that, but I want to make sure it's open.
See, that's the catch-22. A pole sign, you can get it in the site triangle because you're using, the pole can be in the
Right.
site triangle and you put the face way up high. You go a monument sign, it's less intrusive, but it's a bigger base, but it can't be in the site triangle. But it'll look better, it's more attractive, there's less intense. So typically those, as you see down Houston Road, are typically shifted in front of the structure, probably in the middle, and they get two-way sign face that way. But yeah, there'd have to be a permit issued on the sign independently of everything else. So,
And then in this discussion, we're just talking about the flume at this point.
the applicant
That's all we're
chose just to
talking
file the flume today, and see what your feelings on it were before he went to the expense and filed the zone change.
Any more questions or discussion? Hey, would anybody like to speak in favor of the flume amendment? You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you want to, now's the time to do it.
I mean, if there's nothing left to be added, he pretty much covered everything. Whatever I need to do, I'm willing to do it.
We've been working on this for some months. What would you say? How many months have we been talking? 6?
It's been a while.
6 or 8? Yeah.
You know, of course, I was coming in a little bit before, just trying to engage and
Yeah. Probably 8 months. He came in the office, somewhere in there. And then some of the issue was trying to get the survey done. Surveyors are very busy, and he kind of got put back on the 6-week, 8-week kind of, we'll get to you. Maybe even changed different firms. So it took a while to get some of the technical things figured out.
All right, just for the record, if you'd state your name and address, since you did participate in the discussion.
yes, sir. My name is Kobe Sassin, and I live at 1103 Pacific Road.
Okay, thank you. Since there's nobody else here, I take it, does anybody wish to speak against this Flume amendment? Seeing none, I guess we'll close the public hearing and move on with our zoning meeting, or Flume amendment meeting. To have a motion for, to either approve or deny the Flume amendment.
And we just put a shell of a motion up or down in your staff report. Henry can
Right.
help you guys with a motion either way. There's some technical things that have to go in there past that.
Does anybody,
I make a motion to approve the proposed future land use map amendment based upon the testimony documents presented at this public hearing. Proposed Flume amendment is amended directly to amend the Flume as outlined in chapter 9 of the comprehensive plan. Further, I request that this motion include a summary of evidence and testimony presented by the witnesses at this public hearing.
thank you. Do we have a second for the motion?
Well, I'd like to question
Okay.
clarity on the motion, Henry, for purposes on it. That would include our comments on these 5 general conditions. Is that a statement of fact?
We could make that, incorporate those in there. I'm not sure what you mean by our comment on the conditions.
Well, no, not comment, but the fact that we've listed these and they worked out an agreement on the 5.
Right, exactly.
line items,
I think the
that's-
motion should, I think we could condition our approval of this Flume amendment on those being part of the eventual zoning request. Those-
Draft conditions.
Right.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'd like to do, is link these 5 into that, and they're part of condition, and it'll show up in the zoning evaluation.
It's what Steve was laying out, that the conditions help to establish compatibility, which is our required standard for approving the Flume amendment.
Okay, so would you like to change your motion? Okay, thank you. Do we have a second for the amended motion then?
I will second it.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, raise your hand, please. Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And good luck with it.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, especially,
Hey, no, thank you.
enjoy your day.
Thank you.
So these are different kind of cases, and again, sometimes you've seen them together, and they're a little more
Mhm.
complicated then, because we're looking at the zone change stuff too, so. Appreciate that.
Continuing with our agenda, is there a report from the advisory committee?
No, those are all on there as a courtesy reports. We put them on every month in case there's a report. I will mention the subregs. We've been working on chapter 5 and 6 of the subregs, the technical standards. We created a developer review committee, which has been meeting, and that committee broke into a smaller committee. There's several engineers participating on that, Vantage, AGE, KWM, and we're working through the road standards, depth of road, sidewalks, drainage, construction techniques, construction inspection techniques, testing. All that's being revised to go in our subregs to assume we can build a better public infrastructure product. That developer review committee's got about 12 people on it, and they've been meeting. We meet this Friday again. Henry's participating in that. Once that document is put together, it started with the staff and the city and the county, and we brought some other folks in from the development community and engineers to look at the whole thing. It'll come to the advisory committee. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure who's all on the advisory committee, but we're gonna bring that to the advisory committee to look at, and if they see fit, they would okay it to come onto the agenda. And at some point, you all would be looking at amendments to the subregs for Articles 5 and 6 and an appendices for a development standards chart.
That has nothing to do with the county looking at restrictions putting properties on narrow roads.
All of that would be, that,
Is that
five,
part of that?
5 and 6 are building of new streets.
Okay.
But we are still looking at putting something in Articles 1 or 2 related to that.
Oh, okay.
That's separate. Dwayne Campbell and I are working through. He also wants a fire hydrant spacing standard to be put into place. That would be a requirement. The challenge is 5 and 6 deal with new streets, curb, gutter, sidewalks, like this Candlewood section. What we do on minor plats, like the plats we just approved, when we're gonna trigger hydrants or street widths or bonds, that's a different issue. And so we may bring you some minor amendments to 1, 2, or 3 to relate to those on that. Dwayne Campbell still wants to try to figure something out. What he is leaning towards is some kind of bonding requirement with individual home permits, as opposed to setting the standard that you either can or can't build on a certain size road. He would like to see a bond put on, so when you come in to get a building permit to build a house, let's say on a narrow road, he can require you to post a bond just on that driveway cut.
Well, what does a bond, what does that do in terms of the traffic congestion on the road?
Doesn't address the congestion, address the damage to the road that they're dealing with, that the narrow roads, the fact that we build 8 homes on a narrow road, it damages the road. It doesn't address widening the road, or it would just be an incidental bond that the homeowner has to post during the construction phase, that if they tear up the apron to the road, the county has a mechanism to repair it or hold their bond. Now, what that amount would be or how it'd be assessed hasn't been determined.
Isn't it related to during the construction?
Yes,
Yes,
the home
it's-
construction.
Yeah, during the home construction damage.
Because see, that's where we landed. A lot of this issue was about on the minor plat, let's say we cut off 4 lots. And those 4 lots on the narrow road are gonna cause some congestion. They're gonna cause some damage. But there's lots already platted on roads that we're building houses on every day. There's more of that than there are us cutting up small lots that are causing this.
Mhm.
That Neeld Road example that keeps coming up, those were cuts, and now there's new homes, there's damage to the road's narrow. But there's no telling how many building permits have been issued on another county road that we never platted or replatted. Those are just lots that are sitting out there as 5 acres and 2 acres and 10 acres. And the home construction is damaging those roads to the same degree.
So does the bond cover damage anywhere along that road due to the construction, or just in front of the road?
The goal is in the frontage. That would be hard to determine, and that's what's tricky about what we're talking about here. You know, our options were to put something in the zoning ordinance, the subregs, in front of the building permit, or create some kind of encroachment permit with the county. It really is about what you decide. The narrow roads are a problem for through traffic. The roads are substandard. So it's all of those things together, and how do we address it? Well, we only touch plats. So our rules only come into play if we're platting property. If you're just pulling a permit tomorrow, how do you handle that situation? And so as we look at the number of homes that are being built out in the county, there's more of that happening on narrow roads than there are us cutting off 9 lots on a narrow road.
Mhm.
But we want to also address that. So we are looking at all those things together.
So is the county looking at having any requirements for what, the width of roads where you have development?
Possibly, yes.
Not really.
Yep.
Actively looking.
Dwayne Campbell's considering that, and we're trying to figure out, we're gonna work with Henry, where that would fit in the zoning, and the subregs. Jessamine County, interesting enough, who Henry also represents, has done something similar to that. A minimum road width has to be complied with, but it has a waiver mechanism, I believe, in it, correct?
A frequently invoked waiver mechanism.
Frequently invoked waiver mechanism. And, but 5 and 6 are the technical standards for building new roads. 20-foot wide, curb gutter, all that stuff. Those other issues would go in chapters 1 or 2 or 4, possibly 3. So all those things are coming your way, hopefully for Christmas as a goal. We're not sure if we'll get there or not. So again, that's my advisory committee report, even though there wasn't one. That group that's, let me check real quick. The advisory committee is Jeff, Ann, and Sally. You guys will see that document before the rest of the commission and kind of look through it from a technical standpoint and make a decision whether or not you feel it should go forward to the planning commission or back to the committee that's drafting it. So, and again, there's no other report for personnel or budget either.
Anything on the other new business with the comprehensive plan?
No, we talked about the conference plan last month, and I think a member maybe requested someone from the city attend and give us an update. We made that request, and there could be a conflict or something. We didn't get a reply back whether or not they could attend this meeting to give us an update on the comprehensive plan or what the city's doing in. with the
It still remains important to me because the data for the census is there, and it is part of our comprehensive plan. And the question is, when do we merge these two together? Because the data that is the facts. We want to make sure we get the right level of data and information. But I think it's important, just what you're saying there, is to make sure we understand and blend with the other activities going on.
So since our last meeting, we had a short discussion about the comprehensive plan. From the staff's standpoint, almost about a year ago, I think our plan was, and Terry knows, being on the budget committee, was the most immediate need was to fix the future land use map, especially for the city sections. We put a little extra money in the budget, talked about an intern option to get going on the future land use map amendment for the city portion. We've already completely redone Junction City, Perryville, and there's been a few minor amendments like this of this nature. But the goal was to sort of fix all the inconsistencies, and the staff had started on a draft, working with Bluegrass Ad through our GIS contract. And then the other item was, once the census data was released, obviously to fix Chapter 2, which is the population demographics, maybe drift into the housing section slightly once we get that economic type data on housing and other stuff. But to do some Band-Aid fixes to the comp plan, basically. The comp plan was adopted in March of 17. You know, a lot of folks think the comp plan has a shelf life of 5 years because the statute talks about 5 years, but it's just more that every 5 years, this body's supposed to look at the goals, objectives, the elements, and see if they're still relevant. Some comp plans can be around for 10 or 15 or 20 years. Louisville wrote a plan that was a 20-year plan, but the statute requires you to go back and review it at least every 5 years and just make sure it's still relevant. We actually have reaffirmed the goals and objectives formally here. Since 17, we've made a few amendments to the comp plan, so we've done that. But as far as the 5-year clock, kind of saying you have to do this in 5 years, the goal would be at some point we have to go back and look at the comp plan. And again, a comp plan can be rewritten at any time. Just, hey, let's write a new one or let's revise the old one. That can happen at any time. And what's happened since we kind of set our kind of work scope for the comp plan is we were told the city was looking at revising the comp plan through an outside consultant. And that's really all we know about it at this point in time. And if that's the case, again, I don't think we have an issue with that. It still has to come through this body. We had some questions about timing, funding, or are we going to have to financially participate? Are we going to play a role? And we posed some questions to the city and asked that they attend and maybe give us an update, and that's where we left it. So we made that request since the last meeting, and nobody's here.
What about the county side then?
We don't know. That's one of the questions we had. Is this a city plan or is it a city-county plan? Is it a Perryville plan, Junction City plan? I mean, typically our conference plan is all 4 governments are kind of rolled into one plan, and then we all have separate zoning ordinances or similar zoning ordinances. But those were some of the questions we posed, you know, scope of the plan, timing of the plan, who's managing the conference plan rewrite, will some of the board members participate on the steering committee, some questions of that nature. We just heard literally secondhand that the conference plan was going to be revised or rewritten, that the city staff was proposing that to the commission through an outside consultant. And as you all know, we just had a training in Harrodsburg, and we talked about comprehensive plans and how they evolve or don't evolve, future land use maps, et cetera. The most pressing need, obviously, is the future land use map. And that's another question the staff has. Is the GIS mapping going to be part of this comprehensive plan? Is the flume going to be amended? Or is that still a project that needs to be done and it just pushes it off till the plan is rewritten or revised? Because our goal this year was to work on, in this budget cycle, was to work on the future land use map. My directive was from you all through the budget, that we were gonna try to get that done. And the Bluegrass ad was preparing that, and then we just sort of stopped it because this other project maybe is coming our way in spring of '22.
Mhm.
So it was my suggestion, I think last time, that we simply ask
We did.
a representative from, an appropriate representative from the city to come and give us an update on what their process is,
Sure.
where they are in that process. Wouldn't have to be anything extensive, but it would give us an idea of how their work would affect our work and how we might collaborate.
We did just that. I sent a very, the chairman and vice chairman were CC'd on that email. I sent an email to the city manager that just basically said we had a couple questions about the comp plan. We'd like some, a city rep or him to attend, and just gave the time and date of our next meeting and left it at that. There was a reply back, and then another reply, and then we didn't get a final reply. So we did make the invite, I think, at least 2 different times in that email chain. And again, there could be a conflict or scheduling or something. I don't want to speak for them, but we asked them if they could be here, and we put it on the agenda as you all directed us to. And again, the chairman and vice chairman were CC'd on the email and saw our attempt to do just that.
Perhaps we could note that we're still awaiting that opportunity for collaboration.
Jim, I don't know if you want to comment. You saw.
I guess we could say so noted. I mean, Steve sent a nice invitation as you could ask, and ask them to come and tell us what they were doing, and try to less than appropriate response, in my opinion. Is there any more discussion of the Bloom or comprehensive plan? Any other announcements?
No, sir.
Do we have a motion to resign then? Or adjourn, I'm sorry. Somebody make a motion to adjourn? Okay, do we have a second? Ms. Sleet, thank you. All in favor, hold up your hand. Thank you. Meeting's completed.
Thank you.